After the different direction of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, Godzilla returns in a film that harkens back to the previous Honda-directed giant monster brawls in Jun Fukuda's 1972 film, Godzilla vs. Gigan.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham, and once again I'm here with my co-host Chris, and today we are going to be doing one of my personal favorites in Godzilla vs. Gigan. And this one should be fun. Chris, do you have any fond memories of this one you want to get out real quick?
Yeah, this was one of the first kind of batch of Godzilla VHS tapes that I had as a kid, and this was one of the most frequently rewatched for me as a kid. So this is one where there's heavy nostalgia, and even though I can, objectively say like, hey, this isn't the greatest Godzilla movie, this isn't the peak of the franchise, it is a lot of fun. So what it kind of lacks in sort of originality or quality, it is just really entertaining. So that's kind of my opening thoughts on it.
Yeah, I super like this one. I said in a previous episode, I'm not sure which one it was, but this was the one that I went to the babysitter that lived across the street when I was younger, and it was summer. And this is the one I would always take and pop in their VHS player downstairs while, my sister and them were upstairs. I'm downstairs watching Godzilla vs. Gigan. So
nice.
This is one of the ones I'd always go to as a kid, and still today, I come home and I think about putting on a Godzilla film while I clean up the house or do the dishes or something. I'm like, oh, let me throw on the last 35 minutes of this and watch the fight scene and stuff. So this is a fun one for me.
Nice.
I'll go ahead and get into some history on it. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a 1972 Japanese kaiju film. It was directed by Jun Fukuda, written by Shinichi Sekizawa, and produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, with special effects by Teruyushi Nakano. It was distributed by Toho and produced under their effects-based subsidiary Toho Eizo. And it is the 12th film in the Godzilla franchise and features the fictional characters Godzilla, Gigan, Anguiras, and King Ghidorah. The film stars Hiroshi Ishikawa, Yuriko Hishima, Tomoko Umeda, and Minori Takashima, alongside Hiro Nakajima as Godzilla, Kenpachiro Satsuma as Gigan, Koetsu Omiya as Anguiras, and Kata Ina as King Ghidorah. And this is also the last film in which Godzilla was portrayed by Nakajima after playing the character since the 1954 original, as he subsequently retired from suit acting.
Which is crazy. That's the end of a really important era for the character.
Yeah, it'd be so much fun to portray these characters in a suit for 11, 12 films. Granted, it'd be a lot of constant work. Your body's getting beat up by wearing this suit for so often. These films, a lot of them, they come out only, 9 months apart, and you're probably filming for at least a couple of those months. So you're getting beat up, and I can't blame him for, after 12 films, deciding to retire. I didn't find anything on whether he just didn't want to do it anymore or what, but I'm sure he had enough of wearing a suit.
Yeah, you're talking about basically 20 years of it, and it's a pretty physical job, so yeah, eventually the body just can't take it anymore.
Yeah, 100%. This film was released theatrically in Japan on March 12th, 1972, and it received a wide theatrical release in the United States in 1977 by Cinema Shares under the title Godzilla on Monster Island. And then it was released in the UK by Miracle Films the same year as War of the Monsters. So a couple different titles for it here.
Yeah, and I don't think either of them are particularly... I mean, War of the Monsters, that's pretty generic. You can call just about any monster movie that. But Godzilla on Monster Island, you know, one piece of the trivia is that about a minute of this movie takes place on the so-called Monster Island. You know, we've talked before about how a movie like All Monsters Attack would maybe be more appropriately called Godzilla on Monster Island. So it's interesting to go with, you know, that kind of a title for this movie.
Yeah, there were definitely more names from, like, depending on where it was released and whatnot, but I didn't save those or put them in the notes. But there had to have been 6 or 7 different titles for the film. So maybe while we're going through, I'll look that up and see if I can find that again.
Yeah, a lot of international markets, especially for these older films where the distribution rights were just kind of portioned out to all kinds of different local distributors in the different countries. They often just came up with their own wacky titles and unique names and things like that. I believe in Germany there's some weird thing where, like, a lot of the movies end up having Frankenstein in the title, and with the dubbing or the re-editing or whatever, like, it's kind of like Frankenstein monsters are, it might be like a generic term for monsters that they were using at the time, or they were trying to imply that all of these creatures were, like, created by a Dr. Frankenstein. Like, it's a really weird thing, but I know there's, like, a ton of these movies that the German titles have Frankenstein in the title, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I actually just found them, and in the German DVD title was Godzilla against Frankenstein's Hell Brood or Broad.
There you go.
And then Godzilla against the Giants was Italy. The Planet of Godzilla was Belgium. Godzilla King of the Monsters was Brazil.
Oh, wow.
These aren't even close. Galien, the Monster of the Galaxies Attacks Again, was Spain reissue title.
Sheesh.
So they're all over the place.
Yeah, I definitely like a good old-fashioned, Godzilla versus Gigan does it for me. There's a few of the movies where like a unique title kind of works, but, I've said before, I can tend to kind of prefer when the name Godzilla is in the title, and generally speaking, especially for these older movies, like a good old-fashioned Godzilla versus insert monster here is all I need.
Yeah, I don't mind the American title, the Godzilla on Monster Island. That's not terrible, but some of the other ones, unless you see the trailer or like a movie poster, you have no idea what Galien, the space monster attacks. You have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I had Godzilla vs. Gigan on VHS, and I was talking, I had this like categoric knowledge of the name of every Godzilla movie, and I had an uncle who was arguing me because he kept mentioning Godzilla on Monster Island. I'm like, there's no movie called Godzilla on Monster Island. And years later, I found out that it was Godzilla vs. Gigan.
Yeah, that'll get you, those, with being different titles, and especially being young, you get the VHSs, and they say the Japanese title, Godzilla vs. Gigan, or Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. It's not, or Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. It's not Invasion of Astro Monster. Different stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there were apparently TV broadcasts that used the Godzilla on Monster Island title card. And yeah, I think there's footage and evidence that Invasion of Astro Monster has been released as Monster Zero, as Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. I think some places just called it Astro Monster. There's like Invasion of the Astros. Like there's all kinds of weird variants of that title as well.
Yeah, it's I seen some of the, as we've been going through the episodes, some of the other names for, like, you know, it being other films being released in like Spain and Germany, and I never brought them up because they were, like you said, a lot of them were the Frankenstein name. But maybe I'll have to start doing that and see how much each title differs in different countries.
Yeah, maybe you can pick out the weirdest one for each movie.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, we all know that nobody cares about what these movies are called outside of America and Japan. We all know those are the two countries that matter the most.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. I can't disagree with you.
I'm being sarcastic, but
this movie, Godzilla vs. Gigan, is often criticized due to its slow pacing, heavy use of stock footage, and an inconsistent tone. Even though many fans enjoy the monster tag team battles, stock use of Ifukube's music, and the introduction of Gigan and the return of King Ghidorah and Anguiras. So it's not a fan favorite because of a lot of the stock footage and slow pacing, but then a lot of fans like it due to the monster battles and then the use of Ifukube's music. And I can't disagree with anything said right there.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because when I was a kid, I had this on VHS and saw it before most of the movies that it's pulling stock footage from. So as a kid, that sort of thing didn't register. Whereas a movie like All Monsters Attack or Godzilla's Revenge that I rented the VHS, I knew Sea Monster and I knew Son of Godzilla, so I saw all that footage and I'm like, they're just using it from the other movies. This movie, I didn't see most of the movies first that it's pulling footage from. So the stock footage thing never clicked with me until I got older and I realized it. And yeah, perfectly valid criticism that I think it's something like 7 minutes of footage from the movie is stock footage. The music too, most of it is stock reused footage. So in a very literal sense, there's a good chunk of this movie that is not original. But there's also quite a bit of new and original monster material. There's a lot of, like, you could take out that, 7 minutes of monster stock footage or 5 minutes of monster stock footage, and generally, like, there's still a lot of new monster footage in this movie to get by with. There's a lot of Gigan destroying things. There's a lot of the tag team matchup. Like, you'd still have, like, a feature-length movie even if they didn't stuff it with all of this stock footage. So that's always been interesting to me.
Oh yeah, 100%. This is a fun movie, and we're gonna get into it here. I'll drop a trailer. We'll do a plot synopsis, and then I'll come back and we'll dive right into it with some fun facts. Get into our numbers, get into our usual business.
Sounds good.
見たまえ、2匹の宇宙怪獣を。あの怪獣たちはこのテープが発する信号でコントロールされている。君たちは一体何者なんだ。
今から怪獣たちは東京を中心に手当たり次第に破壊する。 の友達だ
Giant insectoid aliens resembling cockroaches from the dying planet M Space Hunter Nebula plot to colonize the Earth, their planet having become uninhabitable after another race on the planet polluted it, then died out from their effects of their own destruction. The aliens assume the forms of dead humans and work as the development staff of the peace-themed theme park World Children's Land, the centerpiece of which is Godzilla Tower. The Nebula M aliens plan to use the space creatures Gigan and King Ghidorah, guided by 2 action signal tapes to wipe out human civilization. Manga artist Gango Kataka stumbles into their plan after being hired as a concept artist for their park. When Gango and his friends accidentally obtain one of the action signal tapes and play it, Godzilla and Anguiras hear the signal and realize something is amiss. Godzilla sends Anguiras to investigate. When Anguiras approaches Tokyo, the Japan Self-Defense Forces, misunderstanding the monster's intentions, drive him away. Anguiras reports back to Monster Island and Godzilla follows it back to Japan to save the Earth from Gigan and King Ghidorah. The aliens attempt to kill Godzilla with a lethal laser cannon hidden inside Godzilla Tower, but Gango and his companions use the aliens' over-reliance on technology against them, forcing the invaders to unwittingly destroy themselves. After a lengthy fight, Godzilla and Anguiras force Gigan and King Ghidorah back into space, and then Godzilla and Anguiras swim back to Monster Island, but not before Godzilla turns around and gives a roar of triumph in thanks to the human friends. Alright, so we'll get into some fun facts. Disappointed with the critical and commercial reception of 1971's Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, Tomoyuki Tanaka immediately began thinking about how to take Godzilla back to the golden era of the 1960s. Taking note of the Champion Matsuri Festival reissue of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster in 1971, and Invasion of Astro Monster in 1972, which drew in strong attendances of 1,350,000 people, whereas Godzilla vs. Ghidorah had only 400,000 people. Tanaka felt the best way to reinvigorate Godzilla was not to try new things, but bring back fan favorite villain King Ghidorah. Which, I can't agree with him.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you watch the movie and it's very much a sort of child of both of those concepts. You've got Ghidorah as the villain. You've got an alien invasion plotline, which is kind of like, this is the kind of alien invasion plotline that I kind of dig a little bit. I like the idea of like the secret aliens sort of hiding amongst people in these sort of human disguises. Like, that's kind of a bit more than like the traditional kind of alien invasion, and these aliens just happen to look like people and things like that. I don't know. That kind of plotline just doesn't do it for me as much as like something that's a little more kind of clandestine and hidden like this one. So it's an interesting spin on it. I'm not going to say it does it better than Invasion of Astro Monster, but it's a bit more of my style of alien invasion movie. And you've got, Ghidorah returning, and they throw in a new monster like Gigan, and both of those monsters are alien controlled. It's interesting. It's sort of like it's a little bit of a child of those 2 earlier Ghidorah movies.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that alien story too, where, like you said, they're kind of just hiding out in plain sight, and they're using the humans to get what they need, but the humans don't know it until it's already almost too late.
Yeah, and speaking of the alien cockroaches hiding within human kind of outfits and bodies, that's something that about 25 years later, 26 years later, would become very popularized in a movie called Men in Black, where the main villain is a giant kind of bug creature who puts on a human suit.
I never thought of that. That is absolutely true. And another film that I like.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's direct inspiration, but it just shows, like, these ideas, they show up in these sort of chintzy, cheesier movies, and then, 20 years later, if you can execute it the right way, it can be really cool and fun.
Absolutely. Something from the past always comes back, just like music, you know. Newer artists are constantly using old hip-hop beats or old country songs and mixing a new verse into it.
Exactly.
Alright, I'll get back to fun facts. The majority of this film's soundtrack consists of recycled cues from previous Toho films, such as Frankenstein Conquers the World, Etrigan, King Kong Escapes, Battle in Outer Space, and several other Godzilla films. Presumably, in order to cut costs, the film relies again heavily on stock footage from previous films, such as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Invasion of Astro Monster, War of the Gargantuas, and Destroy All Monsters, for Godzilla and King Ghidorah's fighting screen time. And of the film's 89-minute runtime, just over a little of 7 minutes is stock footage. So you were right on the money.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of a shame that it gets such a bad rap. Like, I'm not denying that there's a good chunk of stock footage in the movie, but there's a really good chunk of original monster effects footage in the movie as well. So I don't know, like. I don't know if I'm in the camp of like, oh, if you use any seconds of stock footage, it makes your movie awful. And yeah, 7 minutes is significant. But there's also a lot of non-stock footage material in this movie. You have new footage of Godzilla and Ghidorah battling. You have all of the Gigan footage is new, and there's plenty of that. You know, Godzilla and Anguiras are in the movie. That's all new footage. They have this Godzilla tower that's shooting lasers at Godzilla in the climax. You know, there's a lot of new stuff. So it's like, I almost feel like they felt wrongly pressured to pad the runtime and bloat the runtime with stock footage when they had, you know, quite a good amount of material of their own for this movie. It's like, if this movie was 80 minutes long instead of 89 minutes, and you nixed out, you know, 90% of that stock footage, would it feel like a movie that had no monster footage? Absolutely not. So it's just kind of a weird thing to me. Maybe they just felt they needed to make it feel bigger and more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the stock footage, but when you can tell some of the scenes go from night to day and stuff, as a kid you don't pay attention to that, but as an adult you're like, oh, well, I just seen that scene in a previous film, but I still don't care. I have fun with it either way.
Yeah, or they're putting kind of the image filter on it to kind of darken a daylight scene to kind of make it look like it's in the nighttime, but it's, you know, it's not that good of an image effect, you know, something like that. And like I said, like, I'm like, for me, if you're gonna stock footage like generic explosion footage or generic close-ups of like Ghidorah shooting the lightning out of his breath, like, that stuff doesn't even matter. It's when you're just kind of like repeating full portions of fights that it's like, okay, like, we don't need to do that, especially, like I said, when there's plenty of it in this, plenty of new stuff in this movie as is with the monsters.
I agree with you 100%. This film, Godzilla vs. Gigan, is one of 4 Godzilla movies in which the viewer can understand what the monsters are saying. The other 3 are Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, where the monster's dialogue is translated by the Shobijin, All Monsters Attack, where Manila speaks inside of Ichiro's dreams, and Godzilla vs. Kong, where Kong uses sign language.
Nice. Yes, that's one of the key differences, more or less the only key difference between the original Japanese version and the American version of the movie. Generally speaking, it's just the same cut of the film with an English dub, but the one sort of key kind of content change is that in the Japanese version of the movie, when Godzilla and Anguiras talk, they have speech bubbles, sort of manga-style speech bubbles, because the main character of this movie is kind of like an aspiring kind of comic book manga artist. So this whole movie kind of has a little bit of this manga through line going through it. And so when Godzilla and Anguiras talk, they have manga speech bubbles with subtitles. And in the English dub of it, they decided that instead they would just dub in these sort of stylized monster voices for the monsters. So you hear Godzilla, you know, saying, "Hey, Anguiras," and all this stuff. They're these goofy kind of voices, and as a kid, I loved that. As a kid, like, you know, just as much as Godzilla versus Ghidorah, it's like, oh, that's the one where Godzilla flies. Godzilla versus Gigan, like in my mind, it's like, oh, that's the one where Godzilla talks, and it's so cool when you're a little kid, and you know, it's fun as an adult. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but you know, it's still a fun part of the movie.
Yeah, I always liked Anguiras' response. I believe it was something like, he sounded like a grumpy old man, like, what do you want?
Yeah. You know, there's people that make comments on the internet all the time that it's like, it feels like Godzilla just bosses Anguiras around all the time and sends him on like random tasks. And I mean, he sends him from the island to the mainland just to get absolutely wrecked by the Japanese military and then go back to the island, and then Godzilla comes back with him to fight Gigan and Ghidorah. So it's like Ghidorah, Anguiras is just like absolutely Godzilla's like sidekick.
And I love it. We talked about this in one of the last episodes. I love sidekick Anguiras. I could do this in many more films.
Oh, 100%. He's ride or die with Godzilla, you know, without a doubt.
This was the first film in which Godzilla actually bled himself. It first appears during the big battle later in the film when Gigan flies over Godzilla and swipes his shoulder. And then later when Gigan repeatedly strikes and weakens Godzilla in his forehead and kind of busts his head open. And then Anguiras is also cut in the snout by Gigan at one point with blood squirting towards the camera.
Yeah, and as a kid, I loved those moments of violence, particularly the Anguiras snout or eye or wherever exactly the blade hits. Like, it's like this great moment where Godzilla's kind of on the ropes with the Godzilla tower blasting the lasers at him, and Gigan is standing between Anguiras and Godzilla, and like a true best friend, Anguiras just kind of makes a run for it to try and go help Godzilla, and walks right into Gigan's, you know, buzzsaw, and the blood spurts right into the camera. And when you're a little kid, you're infatuated with extreme violent moments like that.
Yeah, I always liked the part where Gigan is just beating his forehead, just giving him a pounding, and just starts busting his head open. And as a kid, I'm just thinking, well, you better get your shots in now, because you're going to piss him off, and he's going to come back with a vengeance.
Exactly.
In this film, King Ghidorah's 3 heads required completely new sculpts to be made, which were created by Nobuyuki Yasamuru. A year later, the suit would be used one final time for the television series Zone Fighter, and then would be retired after that.
Very nice. On its last legs here, you can definitely see a little bit of a difference in the face / heads of it.
Yeah, I'll have a strong opinion on that once we get to monster design.
Alrighty then.
And then my last one for you is as in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Godzilla never uses his atomic breath against King Ghidorah in this one, or Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. So that was something I guess I never paid attention to, that every time he uses his atomic breath, it's against Gigan in this film.
Huh, that's interesting. That's like one of those interesting things where it maybe doesn't even necessarily feel intentional, but it's just it's odd that these classic Godzilla movies, Godzilla never blasted Ghidorah with his breath. You figure that'd be one of the first things he would want to do, you know, with this superimposing villain.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's your, I guess you would say your like strongest enemy. So you would think that he would use it to his full ability, and just blast the guy constantly. That's all I have for fun facts for you. I'm doing great this morning.
Yeah, no, we're all right.
Did you want to get into monster design now?
Yeah, sure. We can talk monsters. I'll lead on this one, I suppose. the new monster we get in this movie is Gigan, and I think it's one of these like wildly unique monster designs. You know, we have more than a few of those in the Godzilla franchise, but I always liked this sort of biological cyborg kind of look to it. Like, it just feels really monster and really alien. You know, it's not like, oh, that's kind of like a dinosaur, or that's kind of like a tyrannosaur, or kind of like an ape, or something like that, or it's like a big snake. You know, this one it's like, this is like a really alien design. And later on, I saw a review of the movie that kind of compared it to, you know, in terms of kind of dimensions and size and structure, it's very much like a 1-for-1 with Godzilla, but if like Godzilla was sort of like a cybernetic hybrid. You know, it's got these like metal claw hands and these kind of weird wings on the back. It's got these kind of pointy metal feet, this buzzsaw on its chest, and this kind of mechanical open and closing mouth, and a laser, and this sort of robot eye, this cyclopean robot eye. So it's like this weird kind of robotic mirror reflection of Godzilla, and I never really thought about Gigan as a character that way, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, I'd have to say, of probably the entire franchise. I concur on everything that you said about him, and I love that he comes back and we get upgrades of him down the road, or improvements. I wish he's just another. If I could take 10 monsters and, you know, of the entire franchise and bring them into the MonsterVerse, he would probably be number 1 or 2 on my list from what they haven't done so far. I love Gigan for sure, and I think this is why this is one of my favorites when I was younger, is him in general.
Yeah, he's one of those things where he's a better monster than the movie he is in. I by no means hate this movie, but this movie has some things holding it back in general with the production and the time period and the budget and things like that. But Gigan is a better monster than the movie he's in, for sure.
110%. Now, King Ghidorah, on the other hand, I'll go into this, and I just do not like the heads at all. I think they look very cheaply made. I get that the budget for these films, as it goes on, is decreasing, but I've always liked to see Ghidorah in films. You know, I'll always take Ghidorah in future films, but you can tell that they were for sure running out of money when it came to the monster designs. The hair on the heads just looks like it's starting to fall off, and I don't have a problem with anything on Ghidorah except the faces and the heads. They just look very cheaply made. When Ghidorah's flying in, its wings aren't flapping at all, so it just looks like it's almost kind of hovering. Its eyes are glowing red in parts of the film. I love King Ghidorah, but just a couple gripes from my point of view.
Yeah, it feels like the movement and the fluidity of it all as an operating piece, and I know there's a lot of it. You know, you got wings flapping, the 3 individual heads, the person in the suit, and so it doesn't feel like it's as animated and lively portrayed in this one. Interesting thing was that growing up, this was the oldest appearance of King Ghidorah that I had. I saw this one years before I saw any of the other King Ghidorah movies. You know, I even had the one in the 90s before I had the older movies. And so for me, this was like the sort of definitive old Ghidorah design. So then when I saw some of the original appearances in, you know, Ghidorah, Astro Monster, Destroy All Monsters, those are the ones that kind of caught me off guard at how different they looked. But you know, as an adult, it's like, yes, those are the original designs. Those are a bit more effective, and this is sort of just kind of the, you know, cobbled together a little bit, kind of on the fly, put a new head and face on it kind of a look.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. Like I said, they had to resculpt the heads, so I mean, they did what they could, but I wish it would have been a little bit better of an improvement, but I won't knock them for trying what they did.
Yeah, I mean, if the alternative was to keep on old heads that were like deteriorating and withering away and falling off, it's like, yeah, an improvement that maybe isn't an improvement is still better than something that's just like, you know, you get the Rodan left in a hot car look where the beak is just like melting off of his face borderline. You know, we don't want that.
No, not at all. That would not be a good look for this film, because this film already kinda looks cheap in a way, but I do like the look of Anguiras. He pretty much looks the same as Destroy All Monsters, and the only thing I have to say about him that's not good is the suit actor. He's not actually walking on Anguiras's feet. He's kind of like crawling on his front hands and then like his knees of his back legs. So that's the only thing I see in this film that bothers me about him. Otherwise, I love the design still.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a thing. Like, I think that's kind of a little bit of a hallmark of Anguiras a bit, because I think it's meant to be sort of like this four-legged kind of creature, but with the proportions and dimensions of the suit, it sort of requires, to get the kind of look and the position, it kind of requires that the suit actor like walks forward on his knees, and again, I don't know if they expected people to not see it, but it doesn't really feel like they're trying to hide it. So it kind of becomes this weird thing where it's like, is that a goof? Is it meant to imply that, you know, is it meant to be that Anguiras's hind legs are short or is it meant to be like, oh, this is a creature that like weirdly evolved to walk forward on its knees? You know, it's one of those kind of oddity things where the nature of the production is kind of at odds with the logic of the universe of the movie, but I always thought it was funny because, like, as a kid, I just kind of always thought, like, yeah, Anguiras just walks forward on his knees. Like, that's just the kind of weird monster he is. It's odd.
Yeah, again, you know, these are made in the 70s, so I'm not going to complain about them too much. And like you said, that it does look like his hind legs are longer than his front, so it might have just been how the suit was designed, that's how they had to walk to make it work for the film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, it's a guy in there, so if you're a human and you try to go forward and walk on all fours, you encounter the same problem of your arms being longer than your legs. So to kind of even out your positioning and posture, you have to go to your knees. And so, like, they clearly wanted a sort of cool little, like, four-legged, evened out kind of a monster, and just the way the suit was built to design a guy, like, it just didn't allow for that. There's a monster in the Gamera movies, I believe it is Gigan, that is a four-legged monster where all four of the feet are on the ground, and it kind of has a kind of a lurch forward where the back end is kind of in the air a little bit. But the way they design the suit, it's actually a really effective four-legged design where the suit actor isn't forced to kind of drag the knees and drag the feet behind him. So it can, I'm sure that was a very, very difficult thing for them to pull off and make look right as a suit. And at this time in this Godzilla franchise, they clearly weren't kind of, they didn't have the resources and abilities or the effort or the time to kind of rectify that. And maybe they just thought, like, hey, him walking on his knees looks interesting, and went for it, you know?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to complain. But when it comes to the Big G himself, I don't have too many gripes about him either, or complaints. I like this look. It's the same suit as Destroy All Monsters and the Hedra film. The only thing is that you can watch in special features or look anywhere and see this, that the suit was just old and it was falling apart, and you can see that them talking about that there were certain portions of the skin that was hanging off, and the suit was just getting old, and that's the only thing. They didn't have money for a new one, so when it came to this film, they used that same suit, and it almost looked to me as a kid that he had just taken a beating. He was just beaten up, so that's why he had parts of his skin hanging off or something. But as an adult, I know it's just because the suit was falling apart.
Yeah, no, that's always how it read to me as a kid too. That he's just kind of getting blasted away and damaged, and chunks of him and pieces of him are flying off. I mean, we see the blood splurting out of the shoulder and things like that. So it just looks like pieces of Godzilla are just getting wrecked and ripped off of him. So it always read that way for me as a kid. So it's like it kind of enhances the movie a little bit because it shows that Godzilla's just getting the hell beat out of him.
Yeah, and in this one, he definitely does. So I'd hate to see what the suit looked like in the next film if they used the same one.
Exactly. Before we go on, it's not quite a monster, but I want to give an honorable mention to the Godzilla Tower in this movie, because as we've seen, just as a number of Godzilla movies sort of will take a concept from a prior movie and sort of rejigger it and re-enhance it. We talked about the plot similarities with this movie and Invasion of Astro Monster and Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and things like that. Godzilla Tower is interesting because it's sort of directly or indirectly a little bit of a precursor to the Mechagodzilla concept. It is a sort of mechanical Godzilla tower that shoots a very, very powerful laser out of its mouth, and Godzilla ends up having to destroy it, but it helps the two monsters in their battle. And it's just an interesting concept that you kind of see. It's sort of the seed that gets planted, and a few movies later it gets kind of fleshed out into a fully original and unique concept.
Absolutely. I love the design of the Godzilla Tower. I thought it was awesome. Of course, I hated when it was just giving Godzilla the business and just totally whooping him. But that's definitely cool that they designed something such as that as a miniature. I thought that was amazing. I was going to give a shout out to the little cockroaches that they had once the aliens transformed into them, that they didn't look terrible. I didn't know if they might have used real cockroaches or if they just built a smaller mini suit of them and stuck them under some of the boards that came crashing down in a miniature, or how they did that. But I thought that was a pretty cool scene when they transformed back into those.
Yeah, if I had to make a guess, I think when they transform back, it's a bit of I think it's a composite shot. That's the word I'm looking for. I think they sort of composite in footage of cockroaches, but they have that nice little bit of special effects work where they turn the light on them and the shadows on the wall get cast as cockroach shadows. And I feel like that's kind of a gag and gimmick that's been done in a lot of vintage and contemporary horror movies where sort of the person looks like a human, but then the shadow on the wall looks like some kind of creature or monster. I feel like you've seen that, and so that's a good little bit that I always enjoyed.
Yeah, for sure. There's some fun callbacks, I guess you could say, to earlier horror. Do you want to get into favorite character?
Sure, absolutely. I'll do character, then you can take the lead on dialogue. I actually will go with the primary character here, Gingo Odaka, the manga artist, just because he's sort of an interesting kind of he's a different kind of protagonist that you usually get in one of these movies. He's kind of a little wimpy, a little kind of not a tough guy, not terribly heroic. And he faints at one point when he feels like a gun is being held on him. He just seems like a little bit of an oddball kind of a guy, but he's got these kind of interesting virtues about him. There's a scene in the movie where the character comes out of the building and bumps into him and runs off, and he doesn't know anything about this girl, and the guys come out of the building, and these are his prospective employers, and they're like, where did she go? And he intentionally just points them in the wrong direction because he's got a vibe about them that just doesn't seem right, and he doesn't want to get that girl in trouble, so he intentionally throws them off her trail, and it's just a nice little moment. And he's a manga artist, which again, it's kind of like an interesting concept for a protagonist in a Godzilla movie, and some of his artwork is sort of scattered throughout the movie, and he's got these goofball concepts for giant monsters, and so I he's just an interesting kind of protagonist and character for these movies, and I enjoyed him.
I actually chose the same character. He has some good lines in both the American and the Japanese version of this, and how he's afraid of the girl, and he's saying like, oh, she's asking him to say whatever he said again under his breath, and he's like, no, not with you being a black belt. And he's a funny character. I also like his designs, how he uses her as like Shukra and Mamagon and stuff, and she's like, what is this? You're
yeah, it's a great little bit, and in the English dub, he has this kind of a deeper kind of a, I wouldn't say a tough guy voice, but it's sort of a deeper voice, and a more manly kind of a voice. And when I first watched the movie in Japanese, and his character's voice sort of matches a bit more of the character persona, and in the English dub, you don't get as much of a vibe that he's kind of like a somewhat cowardly character, because the voice is kind of this like manly voice, so it just feels like manly protagonist voice, and so some of the mannerisms and goofier things don't read as well. But when you're watching it in Japanese and you kind of get the original actor's voice, and it's like, okay, yeah, this guy's kind of like a little bit of a, he's an artist, he's not a tough guy, he's kind of a little bit of a non-confrontational, wimpy kind of a person, so that comes across a bit more in the Japanese version. And speaking of that line of dialogue where he insults her under his breath, it's great because in the Japanese version, he calls her Mamagon, like calling her the monster that he designed, but in the English dub, he calls her a bitch. And so like, I will give the English dub points for that, because that's just a funnier line of dialogue. and so I always liked that one, watching it, growing up.
Oh yeah, there's a couple good chuckles between those two in this film, and I believe in the American version she calls him a cheeky pig.
Yeah, when he draws the monster designed by her. Yep.
Yeah, so there's a couple good lines of dialogue between those two. It's our main characters are fun, and just like you said, him fainting when I believe he's holding like a piece of corn on the cob in his back, and the guy's like, oh, he must have thought it was a gun. Exactly,
and the English dubs for this film is by no means high art, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, this is kind of a little bit of a schlocky Godzilla movie, and the dub kind of has a schlocky vibe to it. So like Godzilla and Anguiras talking, and like these sort of goofy, inappropriate voices and lines, like it kind of all like. This was a great movie to watch on VHS growing up. It kind of all gelled together really well.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I'll get into my favorite score, which the title is Godzilla Anguiras Depart, and this is what that one was. I'll play a little bit for you. Not sure if you could hear that fully.
No, I heard it just fine, and yes, I feel like that's one of the few new pieces of music done for the movie, and it's an excellent track. I think they also use it in the opening titles, and it just jams.
Yeah, that's another one of those that I can put on and, like I said, go hit the bench press and like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, it just, and again, maybe my memory's not serving me right, but I think it is the opening title music as well, isn't it? Or am I mistaken?
I don't think so.
Maybe it's different. So maybe I'm confusing two different pieces of the music, but either way, both tracks are awesome.
I believe this is the opening title.
Okay, yes. Okay, yeah, they're different.
And then it goes into where is it at? This.
Yeah, okay, yes, alright. Gotcha.
And like I said, I wanted to choose the main title for this one, and I did a re-listen of the soundtrack, and that Godzilla and Anguiras Depart. I ended up choosing that one.
Yeah, they're both really, really good tracks. And yes, I was confusing them because I think, like I said, I don't know if the opening title, like, they talk about some of the tracks being lifted from, like, Frankenstein versus Baragon and stuff. For the life of me, I don't know for sure if the opening title is an original piece or if it's lifted from somewhere else, but either way, I do love the opening title track. I love Godzilla and Anguiras leave Monster Island. And then I'd like to give a little shout out to the sort of the original Godzilla song that they do at the end of the movie. Like that's a fun track, you know?
Yeah, I like that original song more than the original song in the last film, Godzilla vs. Ghidorah.
Definitely. As far as like for the Godzilla movies that kind of have an original kind of Godzilla song, like that one was a fun one for me. I enjoyed that one.
Absolutely. And even in the next film, we get another good one. So we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Exactly. Yep. Indeed we will.
I'll give you my favorite quote, which it's kind of like a couple lines mixed together, but it was I believe it was Mr. Kubota saying when he was talking about the planet that they originally came from and how it ceased to be. And he said, even now, 100 million years later, the atmosphere is still polluted and devoid of oxygen. It's a toxic world of radioactive wasteland, and you may not believe me, but your Earth is following the same path.
Yeah, that's an excellent line, and that is actually what I had chosen to be my favorite line of dialogue as well. Just because, this movie doesn't go hard in the paint on the environmental theme, but it does show that was still something that was very topical at the time and very, very much on people's minds at the time.
Yeah, it was almost like a little callback to Hedra, like Jun Fukuda giving that film a little nod.
Yeah, exactly. I even think there's a little bit of the footage of the sort of, waste floating across the ocean surface from that movie that's used here. And in fact, the first time I saw Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, seeing that shot, I'm like, oh, okay, so Gigan listed the shot of that sludge on the surface of the water from Ghidorah. And yeah, it does feel a little bit like, maybe one of the producers, Tomoyuki Tanaka or somebody, was trying to say, like, look, we can have a little bit of a shout out to an environmental and pollution, theme without kind of going as wild and hippie and trippy and psychedelic as Godzilla vs. Ghidorah went, not necessarily being like a condemnation of the subject matter that they went with for Ghidorah, but more of a commentary on, like, well, you kind of executed it a little poorly. Like, there's a place for this sort of thing in a Godzilla movie. You just don't got to go too crazy with it.
Yeah, like you said, it doesn't have to be the whole movie. There can be a little snippet of it, but we don't have to go crazy. And like you said, with the psychedelic stuff, it doesn't have to be as big a part of the movie as they made it in that one. But I still like that one as well.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that, 50 plus years later, that the world didn't become overpolluted and end in the 70s. Nice to know we made it through.
Yeah, we're still not doing great, but we're not there yet.
Exactly.
I'll go into my favorite scene, and I chose the monster battle, but I guess I'm going to choose a specific portion of the monster battle, and that's when Godzilla gets back up, and they're like, Godzilla's back on his feet again, and he just turns around and gives Gigan a tail whip to the chest and knocks him down and gets on him, and he's like sitting on him and like jumping up and down, and he's punching him, and that couple minutes I especially like of the fight scene. But I do want to give a shout out because I did almost choose where Gigan flies and cuts Godzilla's shoulder open, and then just repeatedly flies back and just pummels him a couple times. So that portion of the film was my favorite scene.
Yeah, I almost want to cheat and just say that, like, anything that Gigan does on screen, or anytime Gigan's on screen, like, that is a monster. Like I said, my love for Gigan is very disproportionate to my overall kind of opinion of this movie, and Gigan's just an awesome creature. Like, he's just a creature that seems to like relish in being evil, like overtly evil and mean-spirited, in a way that even, like, King Ghidorah sometimes kind of lacks a personality because it's three heads and it's kind of always noodling the heads around. And but yeah, Gigan, anything Gigan does in the movie is just aces. I love when he's flying and cutting Godzilla's shoulder. I love when he's cracking him on the head. I love when he takes the buzzsaw to Anguiras' face, when he's sort of like tagging in and tag teaming with Ghidorah. I love that. I love anything Gigan does.
Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to Anguiras when it comes to favorite scene, when he's jumping back and Godzilla's got Ghidorah's heads trapped behind him, and he's just pummeling like his back spikes into Ghidorah, and it's the same shot over and over again, but it happens like 3 or 4 times, and then Godzilla just completely like holds him by the necks and suplexes and slams him over. That's a fun scene as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the idea of Godzilla sort of subduing Ghidorah by folding his heads back and tucking them back behind him and just wrangling the three heads together. Like, it's just it's an awesome moment. This movie has its moments for sure with the monster action, and maybe, they clearly felt it wasn't sufficient. They needed to pad it out, and maybe it would feel kind of like a very quick and short fight if they took it down to all the original footage of the movie. But it's like, you can see a version of this movie that, like, you look at something like All Monsters Attack, that's like a 69, 70-minute movie. It's like, if you edit this movie down a bit and maybe chop out some of the padding in the middle, some of the human plotting in the middle that kind of meanders, you can maybe have like a lean, mean, like 75-minute version of this movie that still feels like it has enough, proportional monster action, But they clearly wanted like a bit of a bigger event movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll go right into numbers since we're talking about numbers, and get into some screen time and stuff like that. In Japan, this film sold approximately just under 1.8 million tickets, and it earned 320 million yen in Japan, and it grossed just about 20 million worldwide. And that these are, again, not adjusted for inflation. So this film did pretty good worldwide.
Yeah, not bad at all. And I think it was a pretty significant uptick in ticket sales from Ghidorah. Not to the heights of the earlier movies, but I think it was an improvement, that they were looking for after Godzilla vs. Ghidorah.
Yeah, it's almost with the money they made on this, it kind of gained a little more interest to once again make another one.
Yeah. And they went back to a little bit more of an old-fashioned, colorful kind of monster mash. Ghidorah is kind of Godzilla vs. Ghidorah is kind of a monochromatic movie. There's just like a lot of like grays and blues and dark colors and blacks and things like that. And this one, you've got the golden Ghidorah, you've got the Godzilla Tower shooting the bright blue laser blast. Just feels a little bit more of a, you got like the manga art and this kind of like the coloring of the outfits and stuff. It just feels a little bit more of a colorful film. The villains are in these like bright orange suits, so it's got a little bit more of a fun comic booky kind of color palette. Some of this might be the nature of the state of the restorations of these movies. Maybe Godzilla vs. Ghidorah's print isn't in very great condition and things like that, but this is just a little bit more of a colorful movie, a little bit more of an old school monster mash.
Yeah, even the where they're fighting, what is it, the children's playland, or what, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but even the design of that is all types of different colors. Where Godzilla, the buildings they're destroying and stuff, are portions of them are painted like a orange or like a tinted whitish, or it's just all types of different colors in this film.
Yeah, and also, while we're on that note, like, why has, like, a real-life Godzilla land, like, replicating this movie been created somewhere? Like, maybe not necessarily to scale, but, like, why is there not, like, a 20-foot, like, replica of, like, the Godzilla Tower in some Japanese theme park somewhere? Like, why is this not, like, this entire area, like, not recreated somewhere for people to go and visit,
That would be phenomenal. I mean, one of these days I'll get over to Japan and visit the Godzilla store and stuff, but that costs a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Not a cheap thing to do.
This film has a 67% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's rated 5.6 out of 10 on IMDb, and 89% of Google users liked the film. So, keeping it on the high end for the Google users as always.
Yeah, it's a little too much fun to this movie's too much fun to hate on it.
Yeah, even, you just can't take it seriously. And even if you do, it's still 35 minutes of monsters on screen out of a 90-minute movie.
Yeah, it's lost its shine a little bit as I've gotten older and the franchise has progressed and things like that. But it is a fun one. It's a little schlocky and goofy, and I don't usually. In general, I don't rate those movies terribly high, and like I love the first half hour, and I love the final half hour. But it does have a middle half hour of the movie that's a little slow. It's a little kind of meandering, and so it kind of loses its momentum kind of in the midst of the movie. But generally, like, this is a good time.
Yeah, that middle half hour where they're trying to figure out, who Mr. Kubota and them are. They're driving around to the guy's parents, I believe it's his parents' house and stuff like that. It does drag a bit, but the first half hour, our introduction to the characters, and then the last half hour, that's the monster fight and them blowing up Godzilla Tower and stuff. That's phenomenal. That hour right there, I love.
Yeah, and you get and I mean, this is the kind of the first official 2v2 monster tag team match, so it's important for that. That was always the most entertaining aspect of it for me as a kid.
For sure. And what helps is Godzilla's on film for 16 minutes and 12 seconds, or 18% of the film. And he shows up very quickly. 21 seconds into the film, we get a tease of him blowing his atomic breath, or under 1% of the film. So just before the title credits, he shows up, gets a little walk-in, blows his atomic heat ray, and then boom, we're into the credits.
Yeah, and that's always been one of my favorite kind of opening shots of these movies. Like, that one always stuck with me as a kid. Like, the Godzilla just walking and blasting into the camera. I've always wanted to see a sort of modern rendition of that kind of scene, of just kind of the close-up of Godzilla where he blasts the breath like right at the screen, right at the camera. I've always wanted to see that with modern effects because I just loved it here. It's just such a fun way to introduce the movie.
Yeah, and it gets it going right away because you're here to see Godzilla, and boom, as soon as the camera turns on, there he is, and he's getting you right into the credits, right into the movie. So
exactly.
But that's all I have for numbers for you. If we want to get into our tier rating and find out where both of us had this as a favorite when we were kids. So now that we're grown, see where Godzilla vs. Gigan lands.
Yeah, and I'll let you do your rankings first, but I will say that while I have, there are some of these movies where the entertainment value and the fun value is there, and I enjoy them, but as sort of, if I'm kind of trying to judge them as films, as movies, in the pantheon with these other sort of other films and movies, it's like, well, some of these are have the entertainment value as well, while also being a bit more of, fundamentally sound movies with kind of better protagonists and better plot mechanization and just more effective storytelling. So it's like, yeah, I can be a sucker for just like a good old fashioned like cheesy monster mash, but I have to admit, like, that doesn't really gain you a ton of love when it comes to ranking the overall quality of these movies.
Nope, and I'm going 100% off my preference for entertainment value, how much I like the monsters, how much I like the characters. Characters are a big one for me that help in ranking, so I'll go ahead and dive into mine again from the top, so that way another one we're getting rid of this week isn't spoiled. At 1, I'm going to keep Mothra vs. Godzilla. 2, Invasion of Astro Monster. 3, King Kong vs. Godzilla. 4, the original Godzilla from 54. 5, I'm going to put Godzilla vs. Gigan. 6, Godzilla vs. Hedra. 7, Son of Godzilla. 8, Destroy All Monsters. 9, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. 10, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. 11, Godzilla Raids Again. And in 12th is All Monsters Attack. And this week, with getting rid of 2 of them, All Monsters Attack is still gone. And even though it's higher than Godzilla Raids Again, I am going to get rid of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster and keep Godzilla Raids Again.
Oof. Brutal. That is the first hot take, that you would keep Raids Again but get rid of Ghidorah. That's the first. That might be the first hot take of our discussions here.
Oh yeah, I'm ready for the death threats.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. I'll get into mine here, and it's interesting for me because I'll say that my ranking of these 15. It wouldn't necessarily be that it's like, oh, I'm keeping, I don't think I'll necessarily keep the top 10. I don't know if that's necessarily how it's going to shake out, because I'm trying to look at like keeping sort of the 10 that kind of make a kind of 10 movie kind of flow and structure a little bit the best. So like, there might be some that make my final 10 that I have to keep that aren't necessarily more entertaining than some of the ones I cut, so it's an interesting discussion to have, but maybe not. We'll see. Let me just get into it. I'll start with the top. I still got Mothra vs. Godzilla. I'll have Godzilla as my number 2. Still have King Kong vs. Godzilla my number 3. Still have Destroy All Monsters number 4. Number 5, Ghidorah. Number 6, Son of Godzilla. Number 7, Astro Monster. Those are close though. Number 8, I still put Raids Again there. I like the traditional 50 style. Number 9, I have Godzilla vs. Gigan. 10, Godzilla vs. Ghidorah. 11, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. 12, All Monsters Attack. And as of now, like, I will be saying farewell to All Monsters Attack and Ebirah.
Okay, so Invasion of Astro Monster is still safe. I was crossing my fingers.
Yeah. Here's the thing. It will either it might barely make the cut, or it would probably be the last one that I get rid of to make the 10.
Well, I appreciate the effort on that one, because clearly I think highly.
Yeah, it's my legitimate opinion of it, and it's one of those where, I've had this thought. The reason I pitched this keep 10, lose 5 thing is because I've thought about it myself before. And so, and Astro Monster was always one that was kind of on the bubble. There's a lot of things I like about it, and then there's a lot of things I kind of don't love about it. But again, it's kind of for me, it's tough because it's if it's an important entry in the series, it kind of gains value for me. Raids Again will stay, even though I might sort of enjoy watching a movie like Godzilla vs. Gigan more. It's Raids Again is it's kind of a necessary piece of the story. So it's Raids Again kind of gets almost a free pass. And, Astro Monster might fall in the same way. Raids Again I have ranked lower than Astro Monster, but I'll say I'm not cutting Raids Again, and Astro Monster might, depending on how it all shakes out.
Okay, we're taking 2 different approaches to this, but I like it. I like both approaches. You're looking at it as you want a complete story, and I'm going straight entertainment value. So I can't argue with each one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good. If we were both using the exact same parameters, it'd be a less interesting conversation.
For sure. But before we wrap up, I do want to say again, check out our Facebook page, Chills and Thrills on Facebook, where we have discussions and polls for the next series we're going to do. But Chris, do you have anything else on Godzilla vs. Gigan before we head out?
If we're going to do maybe some overall concluding thoughts, it's a really entertaining movie. I like the movie. It has, we're into the 70s era of Godzilla movies where they started to get kind of cheap, started to rely on stock footage. The kind of bad stretch that I always kind of refer to is All Monsters Attack in 69 up through Godzilla vs. Megalon in 73. These 4 movies, All Monsters Attack, Ghidorah, Gigan, Megalon, they're rough and they're strained productions, and they all have huge concessions in the way they're made and put together. So it can be rough and cheesy and cringy to rewatch them. But of those 4, I would say that Godzilla vs. Gigan comes away the best. It still kind of has enough of its own material, enough of its own unique monster action that it stands out in these early 70s goofy movies. I think it shows that Jun Fukuda as a director continues to improve. I don't know if I like this one better than Son of Godzilla. That's kind of a different conversation to have. But he's certainly going from just the Island Godzilla movies into the kind of this sort of bigger monster mash kind of Godzilla movie, and this is a stepping stone to a bit of a future Godzilla movie that he'll make, where I think everything comes together. And I mean, we're getting near the end of the franchise, so most people probably know what that is at this point. But this is a fun one. It's not a great movie, but it is an entertaining movie. It's certainly one that if you have little ones that you're trying to sort of get into the fun of Godzilla, there's a lot of monster stuff in it, and it's a pretty short movie that, this is a nice, easy entry point for young viewers.
Absolutely. And I love this movie. Out of the Godzilla franchise, out of all the time I've been watching, I've probably watched this the 3rd most amount of times in my life. There's probably only 2 Godzilla films that I've watched more than this one, and we'll get to those here eventually down the road. But yeah, this one's so much fun. Gigan's great, Godzilla's great, the Godzilla Tower great. Our characters, they have their moments in this, but that's all I have for Godzilla vs. Gigan, and I'm excited for the next one. I appreciate you joining me on this one. This one was fun.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
All right, next week we will be looking at Godzilla vs. Megalon, which was released on March 17th, 1973. And again, that's another fun one. But until we get to that one, again, Chris, I will say thank you, and until next time.